So yesterday, the GOP sent out a Truth Social post, which is hilarious to me that people are still actually on that, but whatever. So they sent out a Truth Social post with this image. If you're listening, it's an image of Donald Trump, J.D. Vance, Elon Musk, RFK Jr., and Tulsi Gabbard, and it says, "Unite America" on it. Apparently, we conservatives are supposed to be happy about far-left Democrats who were too crazy for their own party being part of the Republican nominee's transition team if he wins. I don't understand how this furthers conservatism, and that's what we're going to talk about today. So we're going to talk about why I don't think that conservatives should be excited about Tulsi and RFK joining the Trump team, how I think they'll potentially actually hurt him electorally. Not that it matters, because I'm also going to talk about why Trump himself has completely lost his mind. And finally, 5 weeks after becoming her party's nominee, Kamala Harris finally does an interview last night with CNN. So not sure how to score it when she needed her VP Tim Walz there, like some sort of emotional support animal, but we'll get to that as well. Welcome to The Homeless Conservative, a show about principled politics for exhausted citizens. I'm Blake Fisher. I'm your host, and I'm a political junkie so that you don't necessarily have to be. I appreciate you taking some time out of your busy schedule. I normally release these on Wednesdays, but I'd kind of had an episode planned, and then events changed as they do in politics, and I decided, no, let's actually do it for Friday. So you're going to get this, and then I'll leave you alone for the weekend. I hope you have a good Labor Day weekend planned. Going to the lake myself. One thing that's interesting about this photo, though, that I'll put back on the screen if you're watching, I was reading this in the Dispatch, and they mentioned that in their Slack channel, they asked, were any of these people Republicans 10 years ago? And now the GOP is sending this picture out like, this is our crew. We're proud of this crew. I don't know why I've seen so much excitement about people embracing this RFK Jr. endorsement and Tulsi Gabbard endorsement. I don't care about the endorsement so much. It's more of they're going to be on the transition team and help us hire people. Should we trust these people? It's sort of interesting that this Trumpified GOP is vocally uninterested in people like myself being part of the coalition. Trump has said, previously, a little earlier in the spring, obviously, now he wants some people, but it was like Haley voters, people that donated to Haley or anyone like that. And really he said this kind of across the board with any of those people. Just Haley was just stuck around for longer. But essentially she was like, if you support them, we don't want you here. The entire convention was about getting rid of any part of the Reaganite or like that is gone. That's the reason he picked J.D. Vance, according to sources, is that he wanted to do Burgum and his kids convinced him and Tucker convinced him that was a bad choice. If you have a neocon Reaganite Republican, they'll assassinate you so that they can put him in power instead. It's just kind of lunacy. They're obviously clearly trying to push all traditional Republicans. If you have ideas that Republicans had in 2012, Mitt Romney, for example, when he ran for president, if you have those same ideas or if you think those are good Republicans, we don't want you in the party, but we are cool and we'll embrace you with open arms if you have a history of very progressive ideas like RFK Jr. does and Tulsi Gabbard for that matter. You're in. It's almost like Trump just loves a convert, I think is really what it boils down to. So, if you're anti-American, come on in. If you are pro-American, maybe not. It's a weird coalition that they're kind of building here, and it makes me feel like the title of this podcast is accurate and will continue to be so because I don't know where am I supposed to go, right? So let's start with RFK Jr., okay? RFK Jr. is getting added to the transition team as well as Tulsi Gabbard. And, I think that this is a little bit, I don't know. It just feels, I don't know if it's smart, but let's talk about specifically why this is happening. I'm not totally sure. I think most of the overlap here, if you had to have like a Venn diagram of RFK Jr. and Donald Trump and where does the support for those two people overlap, it's going to obviously be the sort of vocal opposition to the government's COVID-19 response, specifically sort of the tyranny of some of that came from the left specifically. I think that's the biggest overlap between these two. There's no doubt that the government, I think, behaved badly during COVID. We had mask mandates not based on science. We had social distancing not based on science. We had school closures not based on science. We had learning loss. I mean, I think that absolutely the learning loss from 2020 and 2021 in some of the bluer states and cities, I think are going to be with us for decades. It's very hard to catch back up to that. We've been graduating kids and they are not ready to go into the workforce or college. I think it's going to be a long-term thing that we're going to have to deal with. And that was terribly mismanaged by the government. Vaccine mandates were a thing that I am absolutely against. I don't think that you should have to take the COVID vaccine to go to work. I just don't think that was okay policy-wise. So I think that most of these complaints are legitimate and there's an overlap there. But do you really line up on a lot of stuff? And here's my question about that, by the way. I think it's worth noting Trump was the president and the head of the executive branch while all of that stuff happened. I realize he can't control states. I realize he can't control cities. I realize that. He can't control workplaces. He can't control the media. But he was in charge of the executive branch, which controls the CDC and various other government agencies that implemented some of these rules. He could have stopped them if he wanted to, and he didn't. So I don't think Trump behaved specifically great. Now, I mean, I'm going to give him total credit for Operation Warp Speed. That was absolutely the Trump White House getting regulation out of the way to get a vaccine as quickly as possible. Of course, he can't brag about that because, significant portion of his base is anti-vaccine, completely anti-vaccine, which is different than being anti-vaccine mandates, in my opinion. So he can't really brag about that part anymore. But there's a laundry list of stuff when it comes to RFK Jr. where he is just flat out wrong. Okay. Donald Trump is not necessarily exaggerating when he said, and I think I've got this tweet. No, that's not it. Hold on. See, I don't have this all set up, but yeah. Okay. This was a Truth Social post where he called a few months ago, RFK Jr. is the most radical left candidate in the race by far. This is in March. He said something similar in May. The reason I think he's actually not far off there, and this has been an interesting thing to watch over the last year, because there was a point where it was all about, we were excited. It was like, oh, yay, we're excited about RFK Jr. being in the race because it looks like he was pulling from Biden support. So it was a good thing for the third party to pull from that. The second it started looking that RFK Jr. might be pulling from Trump's support, it was all attack mode on RFK Jr. and it swung back and forth. And you've seen this on the Democrats side too. The Democrats were, kind of poo-pooing on RFK Jr. at one point when it was hurting Biden. And then once it looked like it was maybe hurting Trump more than it was hurting Biden, now it's like, oh, I think, yeah, he can run in the race and stuff. So this is politics. That's what this is. They're going to attack the people if you think they're hurting you. You're going to welcome them in if you think they're hurting the opponent. That's unfortunately kind of how this works. But I think Donald Trump was right when he said that RFK Jr. is a very far left. He's got very far left ideas. So here's just a few reasons that I think that he's absolutely not qualified to be called. I don't know if he's calling himself a Republican, but here's a few things. Okay. So he supports ending fossil fuels. He has claimed that climate change deniers should be jailed. This was earlier in the 2000s. He protested the Keystone XL pipelines. Of course, Biden did cancel those on day one of his presidency. So there's certainly RFK Jr. lines up with Biden and the Keystone XL pipeline, which I hear from Republicans all the time. And we're talking about if he's on the transition team and he's hiring people, his own press secretary during his presidential run. So this is not early 2000s. It's just right now. Her previous job was consulting for a DEI organization that was funded by the right's favorite boogeyman, George Soros. So, I hear all these complaints about, oh, it's a Soros bot politician. Well, I mean, like his campaign press secretary was a Soros DEI org worker before. This is a far left kind of situation. He also he believes in zero abortion restrictions through 9 months of pregnancy, through the whole thing, no restrictions. He somehow claims that he will reduce abortions by allowing them to go on through all 9 months. I think that's extreme, and the American public tends to agree with me. I know abortion is a complicated issue, but the majority of Americans are not, let's abort babies at 9 months. That's not. He thinks voter ID laws are racist. He supported the Green New Deal. He endorsed Bernie Sanders in 2016. So this is not a guy that is moderate, This is not a guy that has, what is the conservative value here? Would be my question. Now, I know the answer to that, unfortunately, is that, well, Trump doesn't care about conservatism and neither does the Republican Party anymore, hence the homelessness again. But I think this is a mistake. Okay. I don't think that's a good idea. He also wants to cut the military budget in half. You know, he does want to stop all funding in Ukraine, of course, which that lines up. So there's a thing. He thinks Maduro in Venezuela legitimately won this last election, which is, no one believes that. And but this is par for the course with Trump. So it does seem to be that the alignment with RFK Jr. and Trump is all about the conspiracy theories. It's all about the sort of QAnon, deep state. There's a small group of people in America that are controlling everything narrative. RFK Jr. does not believe that the guy who killed his father actually killed his father, despite there being numerous witnesses. Well, I think there were more than a dozen witnesses there. There were photographs of it happening. He doesn't believe that that's what happened. That's a level of conspiracy theory kind of belief that I don't think we should have in our leaders, but I also don't think that the majority of the American public believe that stuff either. So by like wrapping your arms around a sort of conspiracy theory crank, and I get that a lot of Trump supporters are also these kind of conspiracy theory cranks, you can give them a little nugget every once in a while, but I think Trump's going all in on that, believing that 56, some sort of percentage of the population also believes that. I think he's actively turning off gettable voters. I think there's more people that go, I don't know, RFK Jr. sounds kind of like a conspiracy nut combined with Trump's conspiracy nut. Maybe that turns me off of him. I don't think you get more people by embracing RFK Jr. than you maybe push away. I could be totally wrong about that. I don't have any specific data points to look at other than there was a poll that came out today, or not today, I guess it came out in the last few days, but it was a Quinnipiac poll, and it said that 64% of likely voters said RFK Jr.'s endorsement of former President Donald Trump does not change their view of Trump. And 19% said it made them think of Trump more favorably. Well, Trump, Kennedy was only polling at 4.5% nationwide. Now, I've not gone into the individual swing states. Maybe there's enough of that. But if we take 19% of 4.5%, you get 0.8% or something. It's not very much, okay? So we're talking about less than 1% of voters in the entire country might have been persuaded by RFK Jr. endorsing Trump. That might help you. Trump lost by 11,000 votes in Georgia. Maybe that's enough of the state of Georgia. Maybe they're in the right places. I'm just not totally convinced that this is necessary. And meanwhile, there's a lot of people that think he might be a nut job. And you might so all you have to do is turn off 0.8% of the electorate with the endorsement to cancel it out. So I'm not necessarily even thinking it's a great idea necessarily. So beyond, all the progressive policies he has, let's talk about some of those sort of conspiracy nuts, because I think it's worth talking about some of these, because I can just say that out loud and it's an easy thing to stick to someone, but let's back it up with some actual things here. So one, he thinks that Wi-Fi causes leaky brain. This is specifically something where he's saying you've got a blood-brain barrier. He thinks that radioactivity, which, by the way, Wi-Fi is only one part of the massive amounts of radio waves that are going through you all the time. There's, television radio waves. There's radio, like terrestrial FM, AM radios. There's Wi-Fi. There's cell phone signals. There are all sorts of the police radio. There's so many different bands of radio activity that are going through all the time. And all the data shows that there are safe amounts of that, not safe amounts, and there's no evidence whatsoever. We've had Wi-Fi now for decades. I mean, we had Wi-Fi in our house, I think in 2000, maybe 1999. You would think we'd see more problems with people's blood-brain barriers. That's really hard to say quickly, if that was the cause. So he says this kind of thing without any evidence to prove it. And so Wi-Fi is not causing your brain to leak. I mean, this is, of course, coming from a guy that did have a worm in his brain that is still there and I guess died inside of his brain. I'm sure it has nothing to do with him cutting off the head of a whale carcass that he found on the beach one time. That's the other fun story that came out about RFK Jr. this week. So, no, Wi-Fi, no evidence that it causes leaky brain. He also thinks our water is turning kids transgender. Yes, this is a real thing. He thinks that this is kind of piggybacking on Alex Jones, who's also a crazy conspiracy theorist, that there's this one study they looked at that was with frogs, and first of all, frogs and humans are not the same thing. If you notice, most scientific experiments where they're trying to figure out human behavior, they do on mice because genetically they can make that work better. Frogs are amphibians. Their sex is actually changed by all sorts of things like the environment around them. Like they don't go from, it's not like us where we're like male or female when we're conceived and then, that continues. This is like the weather or the temperature can affect their gender when they're developing. And so they looked at this thing and they said, it's like, this is the famous Alex Jones thing where it's turning frogs gay. This is not a scientific thing that applies to humans. And it's also like, there's just no evidence that our water is turning kids gay and transgender. It's a ridiculous conspiracy. And that's the kind of thing that people like RFK Jr. will say. And most normal people in America go, that sounds kind of crazy. Okay. He also thought COVID was manufactured to protect Chinese and Jews. He's said that that's not what he said, but there's video of him at a dinner party saying such a thing. So, that's a little crazy too. And also a little, typically tropey, anti-Semitic. There's globalist Jews that are running everything. Cause you can connect the dots here with RFK Jr. You can say, okay, so he says that COVID was manufactured and it was protecting two specific things. So obviously he thinks Chinese people and Jews somehow connect to that. He also thinks that America is ran by a secret little society of people pulling all the strings. It's easy to make the jump to say that he thinks those people are maybe Jewish. I mean, maybe he hasn't said something as explicitly, but to me, you can kind of put the two things together. And I don't think all the anti-Semitism that's around, especially on the left, is as overt as saying, I hate Jews. I don't think that that's normally what it is. It's these little drips. It's like, well, there's a bunch of global rich elites. And then, also this thing protected, weird that COVID, certain race of Jews don't get it. I don't know. It's a tricky way to say, well, I'm not saying that the Jews are bad. The anti-Semitic stuff has been a problem on the left for a while. I think we're just now seeing its rear its ugly head a little bit more after October 7th last year, but it's not great, right? So he also thinks the CIA has taken over the press. He literally thinks that, that's not that one. So see, I'm already messing this up. But so he thinks the CIA has taken over the press. He specifically named NPR's who is admittedly not a good president, but Catherine Maher as a CIA agent. Again, no evidence that this is happening. I would like to see some evidence that the entire United States press is controlled by the CIA. Doesn't seem very likely to me. I'm not saying the CIA is acting perfectly all the time, but this guy obviously has a conspiratorial kind of mind. And so his source, by the way, for Catherine Maher being a CIA agent is a guy who openly supports QAnon and thinks Pearl Harbor was a myth, that it didn't happen. So you tell me, do you trust the guy that says Pearl Harbor didn't happen? And that's RFK Jr.'s source for the fact that the CIA has taken over all the media people. That doesn't seem very plausible to me. I don't feel like it does. Okay. And then we got to get to vaccines just briefly. Look, I don't want to get into the weeds on all the vaccine talk, but frankly, we should talk about the history of RFK Jr.'s vaccines. I wouldn't even call it skepticism. I think it's outright conspiratorial nonsense. Okay. He claims that the polio vaccine killed more people than polio has. His way of getting there is he says, well, these parts of the vaccine cause brain cancer later. Again, with no actual, causation there. He has no data or science to show this. He also thinks that vaccines cause autism. That has been thoroughly debunked. And I think it's worth talking about a little bit. Like I said, I can just claim that it's been debunked, but let me give you a little bit of history of it. So the entire history of the premise of this whole vaccine and autism thing, specifically the autism connection, is based on this British study by a doctor who has since had his medical license revoked. His name is Andrew Wakefield. The reason why his license has been revoked is because it was a junk study, and it was full of not only lies that he told, but it had a sample size of 12 children. Just 12. That is not a big enough sample size to be a legitimate study. And he tried to hide some of the details of the study, and he hid the evidence that proved this study wrong, if that makes sense. So it's not a good scientific study. Every scientific journal would ever tell you. You can read, you can look at all sorts of things on the internet from credible sources, from people that have medical licenses or have some sort of, degrees in science. I think these are important things to have, and there is no connection. So here's the really crazy part about it. It's like you could have that opinion. So RFK Jr. goes on to write an article. This is in 2005, and it got published in Salon and Rolling Stone. The article was based on two other scientists. It was a father and son team, and the son had no medical or clinical degree. Okay, the dad of this father and son team was frequently paid as a witness in lawsuits that alleged harm done by vaccines. So there's a monetary reason for them to say that vaccines cause autism, because you can now hire me to be the guy that comes and does that at your trial where you're trying to sue the vaccine companies or whoever. Okay, so you've got to always look at a money trail situation to realize where people's motivation is. Beyond getting paid to be on these liability trials, they also conveniently developed a treatment protocol for autism that, I'm not kidding you on this, it injected children with the drug that is used to chemically castrate sex offenders. Oh, and it cost over $70,000 a year. Okay. So you tell me, like, which one do you believe when it comes to that? So here's from Scientific America talking about that specific thing. What was worse, however, was the Greer's solution to this problem, which was to add to the autism quackery known as chelation therapy, another potentially harmful form of quackery, namely chemical castration using Lupron, a drug that shuts down the production of sex hormones, including testosterone. It's a drug that's used to treat metastatic prostate cancer, a treatment that replaced the old treatment for metastatic prostate cancer, namely surgical castration. Not coincidentally, it's also used to chemically castrate sex offenders. Even worse still, the Greers somehow got away with a highly unethical clinical trial in which they packed the Institutional Review Board, overseeing it with their cronies, going merrily on their way, offering an unethical clinical trial, untouched and seemingly untouchable. That should concern us that happened, that we had a approved clinical trial using drugs on children that we use on sex offenders to castrate them. This all comes from the theory. The theory behind this is that the testosterone binds to the mercury in vaccines and somehow makes things go haywire where it causes autism. Like I said, they don't really make the connection. There is scientific evidence that I think testosterone can bind to mercury, but only in benzene, which is not, our blood is not made of benzene. If you were not aware, that is not one of the elements in our blood. So it's like they take a little bit of truth and then they manipulate it in a way that makes you believe, oh, well, I see there's some scientific evidence that testosterone can bind with mercury and be more permanent or something. So their goal in this basically version of the study was like, oh, well, we'll just get rid of the testosterone. We'll attack the testosterone. It's interesting to me that this is all, first of all, the mercury thing, we got to talk about that for a second, because there has not been any mercury via thimerosal, I think that's how you pronounce it, in any childhood vaccines. Most of them were all gone in 2001. There was one left that they removed that from the vaccines in 2003. So if that theory was correct, if the mercury in the vaccines caused autism, and we ended having those in those vaccines in 2003, don't you think we would have seen a decrease in autism? We have not. We have seen an increase. Okay? So that's just, doesn't make any sense. Okay, right? We've seen an increase in autism over the last 20, 30 years, and it should be decreasing if the elements that you say caused the autism in the first place have not been in there since, 2003 at the latest, so over 20 years at this point, okay? So there's just no evidence that vaccines cause autism. The reason I think this is important is because vaccines have done some really good things. Polio, for example. I mean, for him to go back and say that polio is, that more people have died from the vaccines than died from polio. In the 1960s, there were millions of cases of childhood polio every year, and 500,000 kids every year were dying. This is in 1962, I think, was the year before the polio vaccine. It's been a precipitous drop. Okay, so since then, I think that we are now, there's almost like, there's none. There's no one dying of polio now. Okay, so I just think these are important things to do. There are real harms in spreading this kind of lie. And I do generally believe that parents should be able to choose whether they vaccinate their kids or not. I'm fine with that being a decision. I've looked at the evidence and I choose to vaccinate my kids. I don't think there's any harm here. I think the benefit is now with COVID. No, I'm not giving a kid the COVID vaccine. They were not at any risk of dying from the COVID in the first place. So that's one of those where I go, yeah, that is a step too far. And I'm not going to give my kid vaccines from things that I don't think they need vaccines from. I mean, the truth is, it's like, I even question, like, did we really need the chickenpox vaccine? I don't know that that's on the level of polio. I'm happy to have that conversation with people about the differences in some of these things. That's fine. But polio is a good thing that 500,000 kids aren't dying from polio anymore. No risk can outweigh that, in my opinion. Okay, so I just think that, this is causing some real harm because, for example, with measles, that's another one of the popular ones, okay? Actually, sorry, I got somewhere. Polio was worse than that. Those were measles numbers that I was talking about. So measles was the one that was like 3 or 4 million kids a year and 500,000 died. And that went way down since then. So sorry that I got a little confused there. Actually, I'm just gonna, let's see. Here's the chart. So this is, if you're not watching, you can't see the chart, but it peaked in 1963 when the vaccine was licensed, 500,000 kids dying from it, and basically down to in 2000, we declared that measles had been eliminated in the United States. Since then, because of some of this kind of, there's been an uptick in people not vaccinating their kids. We've had a few outbreaks, okay? Most of them are in other parts of the world, but we had 13 cases in 2019, which is the most we've had since 1992. So this does go up, okay? So like I said, if you want to choose that for your kids, I don't have a problem with it. You choose what's right for your family. I don't think we should force the stuff. I don't know that I might have a different opinion on the public school stuff. I'd be willing to have that argument too of should we require certain vaccines for public schools? I'd be happy to talk about that list. I think it's fair to say that like measles, polio, some of these things are like worth having as vaccines, okay? Like I said, we can talk about COVID. We can talk about hepatitis B. We can talk about all those kind of things. That's fine. We can talk about that. Happy to. But vaccines do not cause autism. There is zero evidence that happens. So that's RFK Jr.'s position. I don't think embracing that kind of position is smart for conservatives. That's just what I think. So let's get to Tulsi Gabbard. Tulsi Gabbard, not nearly the conspiracy theorist necessarily that RFK Jr. is, but there's some specific problems that I have with her. I think that she is really smart. I think that she served her country really well in the armed forces, but she's done some things that I do have a problem. In case you don't know who Tulsi Gabbard was, she was a congresswoman from Hawaii who she made enough enemies in the Democratic Party that she was primaried in that state. So she was not, RFK Jr. and Tulsi Gabbard both very much not liked by Democrats. This is not like a conversion. They were homeless. They got basically booted from their party. They need a place. They can't do their grift over on the Democrats, and so they started doing it on our side. Why do we let people do that? I don't really understand. My biggest problem with her specifically is that she's a Putin apologist. She claims the U.S. is to blame for Russia's invasion of Ukraine, which is a ridiculous, again, conspiracy theory. This is all based on, she wants you to believe, and this is what another popular thing on the right in general, which is why she has an overlap, which is why she's endorsing, which is why she's going to be on the transition team. I just want to tell you it's not true. They're claiming that U.S. had biolabs in Ukraine. And when they say biolabs, what they're trying to insinuate is that they were creating like biological weapons in Ukraine, and that's why Putin and Russia invaded. That's not what happened. like what happens in the worldwide pandemic that we just recently had of COVID is that you come across something in a hospital and you don't know what it is. You might send a sample off to a lab to get tested to try to figure out what is going on with this, right? Especially when it's novel. It's something new that we haven't seen before. Those kind of labs are all over the place. Some of them are in Ukraine, and these are biolabs. And yes, they're obviously you're dealing with contagious pathogens sometimes. This is not the kind of biolab that like the Wuhan Institute of Virology was, where they're trying to like do manipulation to stuff. They're like testing and things, okay? This is just like a normal medical lab, okay? We didn't love the fact that the Russians, as they invaded back in like 2014 and 2000, like all these previous stuff in Crimea and stuff, we wanted those to be more secure. So we added some funding. We gave some funding to Ukraine to better secure those facilities. That's the conspiracy. This has all been in the open. None of this was secretive. This is all just like wide open stuff. We need to protect those places. We need to make sure that they don't come in any sort of, problems with Russia invading. Well, Tulsi Gabbard believes that was the justification for Russia going in there. And this is Putin apologist. This is not good. She also cozied up to Bashar al-Assad, the leader of Syria, saying that claiming the U.S. did not have evidence that he used chemical weapons on citizens inside of Syria. But we absolutely do have proof of that, okay? Assad was also actively involved in supporting attacks on U.S. troops in Iraq. So it's really interesting to me that she's got this she's trying to claim that because of her military service. But I mean, Bashar al-Assad was targeting the people she was serving with, okay? And he also made Syria a safe haven for Saddam's ex-military members. So Assad is a bad guy. But because for whatever reason, I think all of this stems back to 2016 and the lie that Donald Trump was colluding with Russia to steal the election in some way. That was a Democratic lie. It's not true. There was not collusion. Now, did Russia want to put their thumb on the scales for United States elections? Yes, they did. I certainly think there's evidence they liked Trump more than Hillary, but I also think they were just trying to sow distrust in the election process itself. I think that's their goal, is to have us fighting about this stuff, and it's worked really well. For whatever reason, because of that, the right, supporters of Trump, have clung on to Putin and Russia as being the good guys. Both things can be true. It can be true that Trump did not collude with Russia and that Russia wanted to collude with them. Both those things can be true at the same time. Russia can still be the bad guy in that story, but for whatever reason, the MAGA movement has embraced Putin and Russia as the good guys. You just have to look back to the Tucker Carlson thing in Russia and pretending that, it's just such propaganda, right? And basically people like Tucker Carlson and Tulsi Gabbard are at the, if I give them the benefit of the doubt, they're at least being fools and relaying the propaganda from Putin to the United States citizens. The worst case scenario, Tulsi Gabbard's been accused of being a Russian asset. I don't know if that's valid or not. I don't have enough information on that to know anything. I would say I would doubt that, but maybe, I don't know. The point is, she's at least being an apologist for them. And I think that's bad enough to say we should not embrace these people. Now I realize I'm out of touch with what a lot of Trump and MAGA Republicans are, but not really though. Because if you look at like polls, which I'm not saying we always trust issue polls, 88% of the country thinks Russia are the bad guys. Period. They can even when they have a difference of opinion on should we support Ukraine, should we not, should we be involved in this, they think like Putin and Russia are the bad guys. That's not even just a majority of the country. That is a gigantic chunk of the country. So why do you think that cozying up to someone that's apologizing for Russia when most of the country and the votes you need to get to win, frankly, in November, don't feel that way about Russia? So also, some other kind of weird positions that she had. She also endorsed Bernie Sanders in 2016. So I think there's that too. So two people that endorsed Bernie Sanders in 2016 are now on the Trump transition team. Explain to me anything conservative about Bernie Sanders. Anything. Bernie Sanders is supposed to be the person where always told we're super afraid of. And of course, I think some of that's died down. But in 2016 to 2020, it certainly was he was the poster child for the far radical left. And these two people supported him. And now Donald Trump's embracing them. I think this is foolish. The enemy of your enemy is not necessarily your friend. Like I said, they did not voluntarily leave the Democratic Party because they felt morally or ideally compelled to do so. They were forced out of their parties, essentially. And they didn't have anywhere to go. And unfortunately, parts of the right are dumb enough to embrace any convert, regardless of looking at the record or something. I don't think that's a good idea. And I think, Democrats are kind of doing this, I feel like, with George Santos now. It's because he got kicked out as a Republican and now he's kind of the flame throwing towards Republicans. Democrats are embracing this grifter. I think it's foolish. I think that we should just say there's no room for you in politics if you are a Russian apologist, or if you think Bashar al-Assad was a good guy and we were wrong in the conflict, or you lie to us about him not using chemical weapons on his own citizenry when we know that happened. That was the famous line in the sand thing that Barack Obama said. That's the line in the sand. And then he did it anyway, and we didn't do anything about it. That's the problem with that Syria specific conflict. So I don't know. I just think Trump is going all in on the weird outcast vibe. That's what he's essentially going for. I read this Nick Cottagio at the Dispatch, again, referencing the Dispatch a lot today. He said, his theory is that Trump's going, if you haven't heard of horseshoe theory, this is getting to some wonky politics stuff. But the idea is that if you've got a horseshoe, the center of gravity is at the bottom of it. And as you move further to the right and the left, that horseshoe moves up. And those points are closer at the fringes of the party than they are in the more moderate parts of the party. It does feel like Trump is going for the fringes of the left in RFK Jr. and Tulsi Gabbard, for sure, and combining them with the fringes of the right that believe some of the same stuff, like the QAnon stuff, the conspiracy theories and stolen elections and that kind of stuff. They sort of start being more alike at the tips of the far left and the far right than they are in the more moderate version of the party. It's an interesting sort of political theory. I think some things are convincing about it, some things aren't, but he's certainly going all in on the weird outcast thing. Going all in. He's going for the pro-weird vote. It's almost like, I don't want to say he's embracing it. I think it's pretty clear that Kamala Harris and Tim Walz's sort of weird attacks on him have been bothering him, but it does seem like they're just not even going to try to get normal people votes. I think that's foolish. I think that you are embracing the fringe, but you are pushing away more people than you gain. I could be wrong about that. We've got a couple months till the election. We'll see if it works. It's just interesting to me because we're in this situation where I think Kamala Harris is a very easy candidate to beat if you were a normal Republican that could stick to the issues and hit her on the stuff that she should be hit on. But he can't stay on message necessarily. And he just loves a convert. He loves someone that says he shouldn't be president and then converts and says, actually, we'll do whatever we want for you. So I think that's where we're at. But let's talk about Trump for a second, though, because I also think he's kind of, I did this a couple weeks ago. I think when Biden was in the race, it was very obvious, even if your TV was on mute, that he seemed old. He was shuffling around. He was falling down sometimes. When he spoke, you could see the confusion. He kind of had that dead eye stare. He looked older, even, like I said, if you had the volume down. Trump doesn't look old. He doesn't seem feeble in that way. But the things he's saying and that are coming out of his mouth, I'm a little bit concerned about. And there's just more stuff all the time. And I always hesitate, like, should I talk about this? Should I not talk about it? I just think this stuff is important to put out there because if you're not hardcore reading his Truth Social post all the time, I actually think the social media companies did him a favor by kicking him off the platforms where everyone wasn't seeing the crazy stuff he was saying all the time. But it's gotten more, it used to be that he kind of lied about stuff. And now I feel like, like I said, he really believes some of this stuff. So this is a clip. This is from an interview he did with Dr. Phil. I'll just play it for you. Here you go.
I look at California. I gave a speech. I had a crowd so big. I said, there's no way I could lose California. But automatically they mark it down if you're a Republican as a loss. That you lose by 5 million votes. I said, 5 million votes. I guarantee if Jesus came down and was the vote counter, I would win California, okay? In other words, if we had an honest vote counter, a really honest vote counter, I do great with the Hispanics, great. I mean, at a level that no Republican's ever done. But if we had an honest vote counter, I would win California.
You think so?
I love Dr. Phil's face and question it. That you think so? I mean, obviously, Dr. Phil, this is a friendly interview. He's not going to push back hard on this, and he doesn't. That's crazy. These are California's numbers, okay? This is the 2020 election. Biden won 63.5% of the votes. So Biden had 11 million votes to Trump's 6 million votes. Biden got almost double the amount of votes. And Trump, this is not Trump. First of all, his stolen election stuff is crazy everywhere because there's no evidence. But at least in Georgia, we were talking about an 11,000 votes. This is 5.5 million votes. This is, well, I did the math. What is this? 29 points, more than 5 million votes. Biden got almost double what Trump got. That's a level of, to pretend that there was a miscounting there because a bunch of people showed up to his rally one time. Well, yeah, you probably got every Republican in the within 50 miles to show up. But there's not that many Republicans in California. We all know this. This is not because, I love that he insinuates that they just mark it down for the Democrat no matter what. If that was happening, we would know about it. This is not election fraud. They didn't make up 5 million extra votes. I'm not saying, do not hear what I'm not saying. It didn't happen in Georgia either, but it's at least believable that you're like, 11,000 votes. That's pretty close. Like, we really do need to make sure that every vote got counted right and that everything was up to, because, maybe that could swing. You can't swing 5 million votes. If he believes that, he's insane. There's no other explanation for it, okay? He also said some stuff this week about, again, he's gone all in on this thing with, we have a border problem, without a doubt. Trump is also better on the border problem, no doubt, than the Biden-Harris administration has been. In fact, almost all of the wins that Biden and Harris are going to try to claim for the last few months is because Biden basically redid the executive order that he claimed to not have the power to do for the last couple of years. So, to catch you up a little bit, the whole border problem is that Trump had signed a bunch of executive orders and made some deals like remain in Mexico, for example, that said if you're a migrant and you're coming through Mexico, we want you to stay in Mexico while we try to process your asylum or basically figure out if we can accept you under asylum and stuff. Okay. And some various other things. Trump had a lot of those. Biden, day one, essentially undoes all of those executive orders and then pretends from then on, as the crisis gets worse and worse. I think 3 million people came across our border illegally during Trump's administration. In the first 3 years of Biden's, it was 10 million. So we're talking more than 3 times the number of people coming over the border. It was absolutely a crisis. It's also a humanitarian crisis, by the way, because again, the cartels are getting paid to traffic humans across the border. That's a problem for lots and lots and lots of reasons. So it's a problem we should not just look at from an immigration standpoint. It's a humanitarian problem. Biden made it worse. Republicans in Congress kept saying, you can undo what you've done, Biden. You undid the executive orders. You can redo them. And he claimed, no, I don't have the power, which is hilarious from someone that is willing to sign an executive order over and over again to forgive student loans. The point being, Republicans eventually said, okay, we'll call your bluff. We'll make the deal. We'll make a law so you can sign it. And he said, I'll sign it, blah, blah, blah. They got a lot of stuff they want. And then Trump torpedoes that. That's all true. And it happened. But then Biden does sign a couple of executive orders that for the last couple of years, he's been claiming he didn't have the power to do. He signs them. And what do you know? We stopped seeing so many border crossings over the last several months. So Biden did have some control of this. However, Trump could hit him with that explanation right now. He could be at a rally and say, I did the right thing on the border. Biden undid it. Therefore, there was a flow of migrants. And now he's started to pick back up my policies. And that's why you've seen a decrease. I want to further better that. That would be the on-message version of Trump. The non-on-message version of Trump says this kind of stuff that just is not true.
They emptied their jails and prisons. They emptied their mental institutions into our country, largely. Now, they're continuing to do it. But if you look at many of these countries that we're talking about, frankly, who can blame them? They're dropping their prisoners into the United States of America. They're dropping all of these people into the United States, including their mental institution people. Any terrorists they have, they're dropping them into the United States. We're taking hundreds of thousands of people that were in jail for murder. You take a look at Venezuela, their jails are half. And I'm surprised half because, frankly, I would have worked faster than that if I were running it. I would have had all of them out of there by now.
Which is a weird thing to say. He's like saying, yeah, I'll send our prisoners to another country. It's weird. That's not happening. It's just not happening. Sure, are some of the people that are coming across the border bad people? Absolutely. In fact, I think the most suspicious thing is when people are coming from, Yemen, Syria, Libya. That was where I'm concerned. Like, so wait, you took a plane to Mexico or South America and then came up through the border? Because that's how, that concerns me. I go, okay, what's going on there? They're absolutely bad people. That's why we should know every single person that's coming across that border. We can't have people flowing over the border without knowing who they are. We need to know who they are, okay? There are criminal elements. In fact, there are Venezuelan gangs in the United States right now. He's getting the causation wrong on it, though. The causation is because the Venezuelan economy is completely collapsed, basically. It's basically doesn't exist. If you're the criminal element, that also means you can't make very much money there. And so they're moving to surrounding countries around Venezuela. And yeah, some of them have come here. They're not emptying their prisons. They're not sending their prisoners here. They're not sending their gangs here. Their terrible policies have forced people to flee Venezuela, but he's pretending Venezuela is this wonderful country. He keeps saying over and over again, well, maybe we'll have our next rally in Venezuela, or our next time we meet or have dinner, we'll have to do it in Venezuela, pretending that we, the United States of America, is as bad is that Venezuela is a better country than the United States. Donald Trump is anti-American. It's so weird to me to have seen the last week transpire where the DNC runs this convention that's all about freedom and opportunity and waving American flags when they've been the party telling me having a flag outside my house is racist for the last 8 years. And to see simultaneously the Republicans embrace anti-Americanism. They think Putin and Russia are better. They think Venezuela is a better country than here. Make America great again implies that America's not great right now. So, I don't know. This is all nonsense. And he's lost his mind. Like I said, he could stay on topic and probably still win this race because Kamala Harris is a pretty bad candidate and she's not getting out there in front of press. And I will give Trump the credit for doing press conferences, for doing interviews. That's more than Kamala's doing, which we'll talk about Kamala in a second. So, but then there's this. I mean, beyond the crazy stuff, beyond the fact that I don't think he is qualified to be the president again, there's stuff like this that is just kind of gross.
Hello, everyone. This is your favorite president, Donald J. Trump, with some very exciting news. By popular demand, I'm doing a new series of Trump digital trading cards. You all know what they are. We've had a lot of fun with them. It's called the America First Collection. 50 all-new stunning digital trading cards. It's really something. These cards show me dancing and even me holding some Bitcoins. Purchase 15 or more of my Trump digital trading cards and we'll mail you a beautiful physical trading card. It's really, I think, quite something. Each physical trading card has an authentic piece of my suit that I wore for the presidential debate, and people are calling it the knockout suit. I don't know about that, but that's what they're calling it. So we'll cut up the knockout suit and you're going to get a piece of it, and we'll be randomly autographing 5 of them, a true collector's item. This is something to give your family, your kids, your grandchildren.
Imagine the excitement of opening a Trump digital trading card on Christmas. I know you can't actually open it because it's digital, but you get that this is a grift, right? This is what Donald Trump is doing, is hedging. If he doesn't lose, he's at least going to make a bunch of money off suckers. $99 for a digital trading card. If you buy 15 of them, I don't know if you caught that part, spend $1,500. They're $99 a piece. You'll get a real trading card that has a piece of the suit he wore at the debate against Biden. This is a grift, okay? I can only imagine the fighting over the digital trading cards from grandma and grandpa or your parents when they die. It's gonna be like Knives Out, right? We're really gonna be going after this inheritance of those digital trading cards that I'm sure will be worth absolutely nothing at that point. You can also, by the way, purchase 75 digital trading cards. It's $7,500, and you'll get to have dinner with Trump at one of his golf courses. So it's a grift. This is not going to his campaign. This is not a campaign fundraiser. This is literally going to his pockets. This is like him hawking the Bible too, and he made $500,000 off that. I think, I don't know. Beyond all the other stuff, this should disgust people. It disgusts me that this is one of the two options we have for being our president again. Imagine anyone else in the world selling something like this, and ask yourself if you would trust them to be the president. Anyone else. Joe Biden was doing this. Kamala Harris was doing this. Any other human being on earth that would do this, and that would be like, yeah, I trust this person. All right, enough about Republicans. Let's talk about Kamala Harris, because she finally does an interview last night. And she proves she's a very strong, independent woman who doesn't need, anyone holding her hand except for Tim Walz being right next to her for no reason. I don't understand why he was there, but I don't have any clips of it. I didn't have time to put clips, but frankly, she did fine, but she didn't really answer the questions. I don't think CNN did a great job of following up with her answers to questions to really push back on it. I've never done an interview with a politician, and yet I think I could have done a better job than Dana Bash. I think that, she asked some good questions, but for the most part, the follow-up just wasn't there. For example, like one of the first questions was, you said you wanted to ban fracking, and now you say you don't. What changed? And she just kind of goes into this, well, my values haven't changed, and in 2020, I said I wouldn't ban fracking, and I'm still not banning fracking. Well, of course, she just means I joined Joe Biden's campaign, and he told me I couldn't talk about banning fracking anymore, and so I didn't talk about banning fracking anymore. I think American people deserve to know where people are on the issues, and we still, right now, have a situation where Kamala Harris does not have. Check it out. Here's the website if you're watching, if you're listening, sorry. Just know that there's nothing to see here. She does not have a policy page on her website. She has a Meet Kamala Harris, she has a Meet Tim Walz, Take Action, and a store, and a donate button. That's it. There is not an issue anywhere here. She's not telling us how she'll solve the problems. The reason she's doing this is because she can't crap on what's happened over the last 4 years because she was in that administration. She's trying to do this like delicate dance. I think this will probably be the only interview we get from her. I think she's going to go, well, we checked that off the box. Now people can't complain we didn't do any media. I think we're going to get one debate out of these two. I frankly don't think that's enough. I think American voters deserve to be able to hear from the candidates, and I think they should be gone after by the press. And the media right now is more interested in what helps or hurts their team than just giving people the facts and going with it. So a couple things that happened during it that kind of drove me crazy. She's blaming Trump and COVID for COVID job loss, and saying that, because Dana Bash asked her at one point, okay, well, you were in the administration for the last 4 years. Why haven't you done these things you're saying you want to do over the last 3 years? And she claimed, well, we had to stabilize the economy. As mentioned, the Biden-Harris administration caused a lot of this inflation. So I think that she can't say that because she's in the administration. To blame Trump for the COVID job loss, there were 23 million, at one point during COVID, 23 million people were unemployed. By the time Biden took office, that was down to 10 million. So most of the COVID recovery had already happened. And this is wildly revisionist of the Democrats to pretend that they weren't the ones that wanted to shut down the economy. It was blue states and blue cities that had the most restrictive COVID stuff. Tim Walz, her VP candidate, had a snitch line in Minnesota where you could call and tell on your neighbors if they were outside of their house. That was a blue state thing. That was a Democrat thing. They were the ones that wanted to shut down the economy. Now, there would have been a degree of that no matter what during COVID, but it was Democrats that fully embraced that. Republican states were the ones that opened up quicker, that put kids back in school faster. That is not, Democrats loved the power of the state and experts and the CDC and Anthony Fauci, their trusted, the science, owner of the science. They loved that. And they embraced it fully to have full control and try to take the reins of the entire economy. And they failed miserably. This is revisionist history, okay? The one thing that I think is becoming more and more apparent is that Tim Walz is a liar. I think it was a bad pick for her. Dana Bash confronted him about, well, you said you carried, weapons in war. And he tried to blame it on bad grammar. This is his exact quote, by the way. He said, those weapons of war that I carried in war. He was talking about AR-15s because he was talking about school shooting. He claimed he got emotional about it and he just got caught up and he wants to prevent kids from being shot. And she kind of pushed back and she said, well, but you said you carried it in war and you weren't in war. And well, it was bad grammar. That's not bad grammar. That's a complete sentence. Those weapons of war that I carried in war. He was not in combat, guys. And that's a lie. And I'm not into the stolen valor thing. I don't think that's totally fair. He was in the Minnesota National Guard for 25 years, and I commend the service, okay? But you need to stop lies. If someone says you retired at a rank that is above where you retired at, correct them. If someone says you saw action in Afghanistan, you need to say, no, I actually never went to Afghanistan. It's important. It's not stolen valor. He's not putting on a uniform pretending he was actually in the National Guard, okay? So I'm not into the stolen valor stuff, but he does need to answer these questions. It does seem like he's exaggerating some of this a little bit, okay? He also did the same thing with the IVF. She confronted him about, well, you said you used IVF, but you didn't. You used IUI. You used a different one. He tried to play it off as, well, yeah, but like IVF was one of the options to me and other families that are trying to grow. That doesn't excuse the lie that you're trying to say Republicans are trying to take away IVF and that you used IVF when you did not use IVF. He does this with everything, and he lies all the time, and he never owns up to it. It would just be nice if someone just owned up to it. But, I don't think that this was as softball an interview as Dr. Phil gave Trump, but I would have liked to see her push back more. I just think that Walt's lives get waved away. Her, answering a question about like, okay, why did your opinion on fracking change? And she just answers it with, well, my values and then climate. And she never really answers or says anything. And there's not really a pushback. My biggest problem with it though, is I don't think she got pushed hard enough on the Biden question. Cause I think there's a really important question here. It's okay, if Biden's out of this because he's not well enough to do a second term, if that's the reason, when did you know that? I think that's a fair question to ask her. And she just kind of stuck by with, no, I still think he's great. But I would have pushed back on that. I'd be like, look, it can only be one of two things. Biden's no longer in this race because either he's not, like what we saw at the debate was real, and he's had this cognitive decline that George Clooney wrote an article about, and Democrats started coming out of the woodwork and saying, I've seen the decline. We heard stories from years back. We heard stories from all the way back in 2021, 2022 about people that said he couldn't remember my name, or he tried to find the person in the room who had been dead for a month and he knew had been dead. There's all these stories that came out, and I think it's fair to ask Kamala Harris, like, okay, you say you are an important part of this administration. When did you notice that? And if you didn't notice it, why should we trust your judgment? Because you didn't notice that the president was declining mentally. I think this is a really important question. And I think it's very fair for the American people to understand who knew what and when. I don't think Joe Biden should be the president right now. I think that everything we saw of him from June 27th on, which, by the way, we hardly see him. We've hardly seen him since. We saw him at the convention last week. They pushed him to Monday night, which I think is wrong. I don't think it's very cool. I'm going to defend Biden and saying putting the sitting president of your party and the country on Monday night of a convention, and his speech started at 11:30 Eastern, so out of prime time too. I think it's kind of wrong. I think it was not a cool thing to do to them. They claim it was an accident because they didn't think of applause lines causing timing issues and bumping the night further back. Maybe that's the case, but whatever. The point is, he kind of got the shaft there. But it's only one of two things. You either forced him off the ticket because he was losing, which that's their prerogative, or you forced him on the ticket because he shouldn't have run again because you were worried about his age and he couldn't do it. It's got to kind of be one of those two. I mean, I do think there is a combination of those two things. I think voters weren't happy about him because they could clearly see with their eyes. They didn't think he could do the job. I think that's still an important question to ask. Like, okay, well, can he do the job right now? I've not seen the evidence that says that he can. His speech was fine at the DNC, but it was on a teleprompter. That's easy to do. He's been able to do teleprompter speeches, and he's still had a couple flubs and weird things. But I don't know. I just think that's a fair question to ask the vice president. It's also a fair question to ask her. She kept talking about the last 10 years. Oh, well, we need to go forward, not back. The last 10 years, and then keeps talking about all the bad things that have happened over the last 10 years, apparently not realizing that Democrats have been in the White House for 6 of the last 10 years, right? I mean, you got the last 2 years of Obama, and then you've got Trump for 4 years, and then you've got Biden and Harris. And Dana Bash did push back and say, "We know you've been the VP, you've been the VP for the last 3.5." I don't know. She never really answered a question. She did fine. It's not going to hurt her. I just think we deserve to hear more from her. If she really thinks she can do this job, she needs to prove it. I think there's still not very many people that haven't decided which way they're going in this race. Most people have either decided they are for Trump or they are for Harris. And almost everything is sorted. I don't think anyone's flip-flopping from one of those two sides over the next couple months. But there are a few people that have not decided, who don't pay a lot of attention to stuff. They're not watching a political show. They're not listening. They're not reading Wall Street Journal. They're not looking at Washington Post. They don't pay attention to the news. But they are voters, and they're going to vote. And it is going to come down to who they think is better suited for this. I'm not sure that either candidate is doing a great job at presenting themselves as being that person. Kamala Harris appears to the campaign's goal is to ride this out, it looks like, on vibes and feelings. Like, we feel better about her, which is why they're calling Trump weird. We'll see if it works. I don't know if it's a great campaign strategy. It's interesting because I think that we're in no matter what, everything's possible right now. I think you could very plausibly say Trump will win. I think you could very plausibly say Trump could lose. I think you could say Kamala could win. She could lose. I think you could say all sorts of things. What I guarantee I'm not going to make a prediction because I don't think that there's clear enough evidence. And I also think crazier things will happen. I think either one of them could lose. I think, and I do mean it that way. I do mean that I think Kamala Harris could melt down in some sort of way and do one of her word salads or cackle her way to where people are like, I don't know, I don't really like her. Or maybe she just doesn't ever show up in the press and people go, I don't know, I'd like to know some idea of what she wants to do. We say that people don't care about policy, but we'll see if that's really true, to not have any policy on your website at all. Trump could also lose it. Trump was ahead. He had the best month ever from July 27th or June 27th to July 27th or so. In that month after the debate, he had a great month. He was cruising along. His lead has narrowed, but it's still a very close race. It's very tight in most of these swing states. But Trump is starting to do things that's losing places, potentially like North Carolina, that were solidly red. So I think either one of these could lose the campaign. I don't really see either one of them doing anything that's going to be genius politically. Trump could stay on message and win. He could do that. So I'm not going to make predictions, but I do predict that after the election, everyone will pretend they saw this coming because it is such a close race. And they'll be like, well, I knew that if she did that, it would be a bad thing. I would say trust the people that put that marker down now and then stick with it. I'm not going to be one of those people, though. Like I said, I don't think there's enough evidence that shows us one way or another what's going to happen. This has been the craziest campaign of my life. I'm not going to tell you it's the most important presidential race because that's just never true. I think really, I don't know. I'll do another episode on that. I'm not going to get into the weeds of it. I don't think this is as consequential election as everyone's making it out to be. I don't think either Kamala Harris or Donald Trump will bring the end of our country. I just don't think it's going to happen. Somewhat for just logistical purposes. I do think that Republicans will probably take the Senate and maybe keep the House. If you've got a House and a Senate that are controlled by Republicans with Kamala Harris in the White House, she's not going to be able to accomplish anything, unless she does work with Republicans. That's true. And, she could be like Bill Clinton and do so. Not a lot of evidence that she has that kind of political talent. So I frankly don't think. Now, I don't trust Kamala Harris to have the House and the Senate. I think Democrat control, even by a very slim majority, would give her a permission structure to try to go all in for everything and go for the Green New Deal and go for banning fracking and go for any of the other things that she wants to do. I think if she gets Democrats in the House and the Senate, and I think that they'll get rid of the filibuster for sure. Right now, it takes 60 votes to pass most stuff in the Senate. I think Democrats will get rid of that filibuster so that they only need 50 votes plus Tim Walz's 51st vote, which is what Biden has done for almost every piece of legislation that's gotten through the Senate. I think that would be dangerous. I think both of them could be bad presidents. I don't think either one of them will bring about the end of the country, though. So I don't think we need that kind of hyperbole going around. All right, that does it for me on this episode of The Homeless Conservative. Thank you so much for joining me and spending some of your valuable time with me. I hope you have a great Labor Day weekend. Have a hot dog or a hamburger. I think that's a necessity on Labor Day weekend. I think you're actually required by law to have a hamburger or a hot dog this weekend. I think that's correct. I'll have to check my sources on that. But hope you have a great weekend. One thing you can do that really helps me out is you can rate or review the podcast wherever you listen. That'd be great. Also, tell a friend about it. That's the other thing that helps. Word of mouth. If you have someone that you think is tired of the way politics is right now and the crazy hyperbole and the vilification of the other side all the time and having to make sure that you know that the other side is evil. If you're tired of that stuff and you have friends that are tired of that stuff, send them my way. I'm trying not to do that kind of thing. It's a lot harder to get eyeballs and earballs on this show because I don't want to do that outrage thing. And so it's more organic. It has to be word of mouth because frankly, algorithms love the outrage and I don't want to do it. So thank you for joining me. I will catch you next time.